Okay, so working with a student who's doing kind of an independent study, and they're kind of experimenting with Cinema 4D. And interestingly enough, they've found their way to doing their ideas using this maze with a little ball that has to go through this, which is funny. Just the intro animation class that I used to teach at my previous university, we had an assignment dealing with a ball rolling on the ground, and how do you make sure that the ball is rolling at the right speed based on the distance, right? So there's a little math, full warning, full disclosure in this tutorial, math will be involved. So let's talk about the components. So first of all, we have this maze, perfect. And a student has excellently laid this out on a grid. This is going to make our job very, very easy drawing a path. I'm not going to do the whole entire path for the object. I will let the student enjoy that process. But I'll do part of that. And then we're going to need to create a sphere. This is just a flat disk down here right now. We'll create a sphere, and then we need to constrain this sphere so that it rotates, and that it follows the path and it rotates at the correct speed in the right direction. So there's a couple little components. So the first thing, though, is we need to have a path. So the easiest way to draw this, the first thing is we're going to use snapping, right? So this is all laid out perfectly on this grid. Yay, Justice, for doing it that way. So we're going to go ahead and draw with the Spline pen tool what this path is going to be. And in this case, in fact, I rarely use Bezier. I always use B-Spline for the most part, right? And B-Spline isn't going to have any handles that I'm going to have to manipulate, but I do have to think about how where I put the point so that I get the right kind of rounding, because it's going to be kind of tight, right? I want the ball to be big enough that I can see it. The other thing too is, because I have this on the grid, is I want to enable snapping. So snapping over here in Cinema 4D is found on the left, and it's a little magnet, right? So you should be able to find this similar to other programs. So I'm going to turn snapping on. It's highlighted blue, so that means that it's enabled. And then I need to tell what kind of snapping I want to use. In this case, I'm going to turn on the grid work plane snap. All right. So you can even see there's a little icon. My little tool is jumping around as I find the grid point snap. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. This is going to be the beginning, as the student has indicated. And then what I want it to do is kind of round this corner, right? And so if I just put a point here and a point here, in fact, let's just show it. I'll put one there and I'll put one there. You can see that it rounds too much when I'm using the B-Spline kind of algorithm. So what I'm going to do is draw a straight line, and what I'm going to do is set a point at the grid, and then I'll set another one at the corner, and then another one here, one grid to the right in this instance, right? And then so every time I come to a place where this is where the turn's going to happen, I'm going to back up one and then put one at the corner where the turn happens, and then the next grid point in whatever the direction of the turn is, right? I'm going to put that there. So each time I was like, oh, this is where the the turn's going to happen. I'll put a point, 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 and you can see that it's rounding it off. And each time I do that, I get a pretty tight turn, but that's kind of what I need here, right? Unless it's going to be a really tiny little ball, it doesn't have the freedom. Just to kind of maintain the curve, just every once in a while, every 10 units on this grid, I'm going to put some points down. And then I won't do too many here because I think we get the idea, right? But also you can see just how quickly, because we're using snapping, because we have a kind of our own internal algorithm, right? It's like a recipe for what this is going to be. All right, so I'll go that far. I will call it good. And I'll just hit enter and then grab my move tool so I get out of the spline. So I have the spline that this thing is going to follow. So we'll come back to that. So the next thing I need to have is the sphere itself. Now I'll admit I did a little experimenting previously. So I'll go ahead and create a sphere, and I'll give it a few more segments so it's nice and smooth. for our purposes, but 100 is too big, right? It's going to crash through. I put it at 2. You'd actually see it right there. In fact, I'm going to use a little snapping here. So we can see that's close to that size. I was conscious of the fact that maybe once we get this into 3D, I might not be able to see the sphere if it's that small. So I actually doubled it. So it was close to the sides, but it will still fit in that little space. And for now, I'm going to leave it at 0. In fact, if I want to, let's hide the maze for a second. And let's put this maze up here. I know there's a bunch of other things. I'm going to do a little altering here. Okay. I'm just going to hide all the other stuff that's added to the scene later that's not important for this tutorial. In fact, you know what? I could probably just delete that. All right, so I have a maze, that's all I need, and I have my sphere, and I have a spline, right? And the sphere itself, I'm gonna leave over here at 0, 0, like just where it's centered, because I'm not going to move the sphere. I'm gonna parent the sphere to something else, and it's going to be attached to the curve, right? And I can use anything to do this. I could create a null and give it a little icon. I just like to, oops, I'm going to go back to the spline menu, and I'll just use a, I don't know, let's use a rectangle this time. So a lot of times I just use a circle, right? So I'll just make this 20 by 20 maybe. Let's make it a little bit smaller, 10 by 10. And what I'm going to do is go into my little side view here, and let's turn the maze on. I need to figure out where the maze floor is. All right, so I have this, oops, and I'm going to put this on the ground. So what I want to do, there's 2 things I'm going to do here. Is I want to put the spline that the path is going to follow, I want to put that down on the ground. Because what's going to happen is, and I guess this could work either way, but you know, if it's on the ground, I want it to be lined up with the ground. So if I make sure that the curve is, you know, at the very bottom of where the maze is, I don't actually have a floor here, but I'll figure that, fix that here in a little bit. So the spline itself, I want to make sure that it's down on the ground. Make sure I'm in object mode here. And again, if I hold down, interesting, so with the grid snap here, I could just move it in here, but if I hold down, let me do this again. So as I start to move this down, I'm getting numerical feedback, right, on how far this is moving. But once I start to move it, if I hold down Shift, and as I start to drag it down now, it will snap to grid increments, right? In this case, we'll do 5-unit increments, and that's going to put it right where I need it to be on the ground. So let's take the sphere itself. Now I need to move that down so that it's going to sit on the ground. And really what I need it to do is be -1 unit. So in this case, because I made it 4 is the radius, and I needed to move it just because these blocks here are 5 units. I just needed to move it 1 off the center, right? And you can just do this. You can eyeball it if you want to, right? I could zoom in here and with the snap. Let's make sure the snapping's turned. Okay. It's just easier to do it numerically, right? But you could just eyeball it if you want to, but I'm fussy that way. Okay, so I have a sphere and in there, and I have the rectangle. The rectangle, again, needs to be down where the other was. It needs to be on the ground. Okay, and you can see right now these objects. Let's see, let's turn my maze off, right? So here's the, excuse me, the rectangle. I'm actually going to make the rectangle, let's make it a little bit bigger, just so I can see it easily outside of the boundary of the maze, okay? And I have my spline here. Right. So what I'm going to do is tell, well, let's parent it first. So I'm going to tell the rectangle to follow the path that's in here. And when it follows, I want the sphere to go along for the ride. Because the only thing I'm going to animate on the sphere is it rotating. And then I'm going to let this kind of controller do all the driving as far as the direction, right? So I've left them here at the center just to not mess with their rotation. In this case, with the sphere, I might freeze the transformations just to zero out all that stuff so I know that that's home base. The rectangle, I could do the same, but I'll just leave it for now. It's not going to make a difference here. So let's go up to the rectangle and right click on it and animation tags. So we're going to do align to spline. So this is, let's take this object and let's make it follow a spline. It has to know which spline. In fact, I'm going to name this ball maze path. Okay. So I'll click on the tag again, and I'm going to drag the ball maze path in there. And you can see that the object immediately snapped over here, right? Because the rectangle, like let's color code the rectangle here a little bit. So I clicked on basic, it's color, let's make it, I don't know, bluish green. Right, so now I can see that pretty easily there. Okay, so if I were to play this as an animation, right, it's not going to do anything. In fact, you know what, let's stay in that wireframe mode. That's probably a little bit better from that top view. Okay, so if I move to the time slider here, it's not going to do anything other than the maze itself is growing right across here, which is kind of cool. But then it's going to follow the path. In fact, let's also make the path a color here. So let's turn on display color on. Let's click in here and let's make this one just red. Okay, so we can see it. Nice and easy. So the way that the tag works here is that it animates position along the curve itself. And I don't know if you can, so you can see right here as it goes along, it's not really turning, right? This shouldn't be lined up straight here. If I turn on this, right? So if I turn on tangential, right? So basically when it does follow the path, it follows the tangent orientation, right? So you can see it's driving, right? It's like a little car, and our ball is along for the ride. The only problem is if we, at this point, I think we need a 3D camera. So let's create a camera, and let's not make it a top-down one. Let's make it a perspective camera. And let's go into this, click on the maze. Right, there's our maze. And with the tag, okay, so we can see how it's animating through there, right? But if I turn on the wireframe for the sphere, what we're going to see is it's not rotating, right? It's just along for the ride. So now this is where the math comes. So if at this point you're like, no math, you can turn off the tutorial and never check out any of my tutorials again. But so in this case, what we need to do is figure out a couple different things. We need to figure out how long the path is. We need to figure out the circumference of the ball, and then how many times it has to rotate to travel along that distance. And the way I always think of this, if this were physical, right, I would pick up the path as if it was a piece of string, and I would wrap it around the ball, to the middle of the ball, to figure out how many times, how many rotations, right? How many lengths of rope go around it, or how many times it goes around the circumference of the ball, how many times, right? 9.7 times or whatever it might be, right? So then it would be 9.7 times, because each time it does that, that's 360 degrees. So 9.7 times 360 would give me whatever that would be. But in this case, we don't know what any of these numbers are yet. and we need to do that. So I'm looking at the tutorial. We're 14 minutes in. I'm going to set this up with one last thing. I'm going to go over the ball maze here, and just so that we can see what we're doing as we're going to go along here, I'm going to right click and go to other tags and add annotation. Okay, so annotation is just this, that's what it is, right? It sits in the 3D viewport and it says annotation. And this is going to be the math. Okay, and so every time we figure out what these numbers are that we're going to use, we'll put it in here. This is going to be my little note card. You all be able to see it in the tutorial, and you could use the similar approach if you want to. So, all right, so that's 15 minutes. I'm going to stop here, and I'll come back with a part 2 where I'll have the conclusion, the math and the ball.